let you settle down. My name is Katia Vladimirová. I am a moderator of the session today, visiting fellow of Boston University. And today I'm delighted to open the session on national policy as part of the policy session, triad of sessions in the afternoon. So today we're going to be speaking about 3 proposals that have made it to the winners in the Climate Collab this year. And we will also be talking with 2 experts who will be giving feedback on these proposals. So the 3 proposals that will be discussed today will be a carbon tax and proposed fiscal reform by Adele Morris, who will be joining us virtually. The little engine that could, carbon fee and dividend, that will be presented by Joseph Robertson. And democratic finance, energy of the people, by the people, for the people, which will be presented by Job Tamiya. The session experts today, we have them right here. We'll be listening to presentations first, and then we'll be walking from group to group to give their feedback. Are Josh Freed, Vice President of Clean Energy from Third Way, and Kurt Spalding, Administrator for New England Region, U.S. Environmental Protection Energy. I suggest we give the winners and the experts a round of applause. The way the session is going to proceed is we will start with 15 to 18 minutes of presentations given by each group. We will start with Adele, and then in the order that I have announced the proposals, the contest participants. After that, we will give 1 or 2 minutes to each expert to give a sneak peek into what kind of feedback they would be giving to each group. And after that, we will break down into groups according to proposals, and Adele's group will be gathered around the computer over here, and experts will be walking from group to group, and within around 45 minutes giving their feedback, extensive feedback to the proposals. 1 expert per group at a time. So let me start without further ado with the presentation by Adele.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Adele Morris. I'm a scholar at the Brookings Institution. I'm an economist in our Economic Studies program, and I'm the project director of the Climate and Energy Economics Project at Brookings. And I'm joining you here from my kitchen with my daughter. This is my daughter, Sophie.
Hi.
So Sophie wanted to hear about the climate proposals, so I told her she could join us. So the purpose of my proposal actually came as part of a package of proposals for deficit reduction through the Brookings Hamilton project about 1.5 years ago. And the objectives in this proposal are, number 1, to reduce U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. Number 2, to reduce the federal deficit. And 3rd, to promote economic growth, and do that all while making sure that poor households are no worse off, that we're promoting the competitiveness of the U.S. economy and the attractiveness of the U.S. economy as a place to invest, and doing it in a way that promotes U.S. climate leadership internationally. So the basic elements of my proposal are to establish a carbon excise tax, which means a tax on the carbon content of fossil fuels as they enter the U.S. economy. That means in the choke point of the energy distribution system. And in addition, the tax base would include identifiable sources of greenhouse gas emissions, either from process emissions of cement or other industrial CO2 sources, and also methane emissions from, for example, landfills or coal mines. So if you can identify a point source of greenhouse gas emissions, that wouldn't be under the tax. I would start the tax, in this proposal, I started the tax quite modestly at $16 per ton of CO2, with the idea that it would go up at 4% over inflation each year, so that by 2030 you're looking at about $30 a ton of CO2, which is just about 30 cents per gallon of gasoline. Over the first 20 years, that would reduce, according to our models, it would reduce emissions by about 9 billion metric tons. And that's about 30% relative to business as usual projections of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. And so the point of this proposal, though, was to illustrate where I thought a deal could be had between Democrats and Republicans. So with the tax on carbon, we have to find a way to appeal to Republicans who otherwise would have no interest in voting for this policy. So in my proposal, I would suspend EPA rulemaking, new EPA rulemakings for greenhouse gases under the Clean Air Act, and that would specifically include the Section 111D rules that you guys heard about in the plenary just now. And I would also repeal other policies that would be promoting clean energy, because you don't need that because you're going to be taxing fossil energy. Now, how would I use the revenue? Well, I said I wanted to make sure that poor households were not worse off. So I earmarked 15% of the revenue to go specifically to the poorest households. And you can do that through revisions to the Earned Income Tax Credit, through electronic benefits transfers, through other programs that build the social safety net for poor households. Part of the revenue would be used to reduce the corporate income tax rate from 35% to 28%. This is something that both Republicans and Democrats have said they want to do. The problem is they need revenue to do that. So I'm looking for a legislative vehicle that might pass anyway for reasons other than climate, and then helping fund that reform using the money from the carbon excise tax. But after the first 10 years, after the 10-year budget window, revenue would still keep going up because the price on carbon goes up faster than emissions fall. So the total gross receipts of the tax actually go up, and we'd have additional revenue to reduce the federal deficit or buy down the debt. And the good news about that is it reduces the burden of the debt on the U.S. economy, and that also has a positive effect over the long run. It's a kind of long-run revenue neutrality. In addition, I would impose a border carbon adjustment, meaning a tax that adjusts for this fee at the border for energy-intensive trade-exposed goods. And that would have to be done very carefully, so it's not protectionist mischief, it's in there protecting our goods from unfair competition. And I'd also include a vigorous diplomatic initiative to leverage U.S. action on climate. And the beauty of a carbon price is it's transparent. It's far easier to explain a carbon tax than 111D regulations. I've been a U.S. negotiator. I know what these talks are like, and it makes a lot of sense to start framing international conversations around carbon pricing. So that's my proposal. And let me just say one other reason why I would reduce the corporate income tax. Instead of, for example, you'll be hearing a proposal to rebate the revenue to households. So certainly that has appeal, but the beauty of reducing the corporate income tax is that that actually produces a pro-growth effect, because what it does is it makes the U.S. economy more attractive to investment. And that greater level of investment boosts GDP, it boosts capital accumulation, and our model suggests that if you do a carbon tax, capital income tax swap, you might even be able to get a net pro-growth benefit without even counting all the environmental benefits. So I really want to provide a solution that cannot be accused of being a job-killing energy tax, and rather can provide a benefit that both parties say they want, and we wouldn't have to be looking for a climate standalone legislation, but rather a package of pro-growth reforms that could get some bipartisan traction. So that's my proposal.
I don't know where the camera is and whether Adele will be able to see you and the audience, but thank you very much. I just wanted to draw your attention to 2 points before proceeding. First one is in order to link the topic of the session with the main theme of the conference, which is about bringing crowds together to resolve climate change, I'd like each of you to think, keep in mind when you're listening to these presentations, questions like, what kind of action could I take on one of these proposals? How can I help realize one of these proposals? Do I know anyone who would be interested in helping with one of these proposals? That's the first point. And the second point, it's really important that we stick to the time limit, which is 3 to 4 minutes. So I'm inviting the next proposal presenters of the project, the little engine that could, carbon fee and dividend. Joseph, Robertson, please.
Do I grab this? Is this? Oh, I used that. I've been told there's a specific place I have to stand to be visible. I don't know. Oh, this is the camera. I see.
There's no light on it. Shine light so you're blinded, and then you'll be in.
I don't have control over the light, so I'm just going to start. So I'm here to talk about our plan, carbon fee and dividend plan. As you all know, the climate is changing, and what that is a pervasive hidden cost that flows from the market's failure to tell the truth about the cost of burning fossil fuels. Climate change is actually a symptom of that underlying economic failure. So we need to find a way that we can address that challenge cost effectively. You can't get political will on this issue unless you can do it cost effectively. We have to price carbon in order to internalize the costs of carbon emitting fuels to the industry that emits the greenhouse gas emissions and imposes those costs on the rest of society. So we have a strategy for doing that we call fee and dividend. You impose a steadily rising carbon fee at the source, the mine, the well, or the port of entry to the United States. The fee starts at $15 per metric ton of CO2 equivalent and rises steadily at $10 per ton per year until we stop burning fossil fuels. The benefit of doing that is that you actually cover the entire economy. How do you cover the entire economy? By imposing the fee at the source, you make sure everyone who's going to emit at some point is covered. No one else has to be charged the fee. It's easy to keep track of all those entities that have to pay the fee. And then we rebate 100% of the revenues directly to households every month. Why do we do that? Because the leverage that we want to see activated is the leverage that investors have to change the behavior of the entire marketplace. And by having a fee that starts at the source and a dividend that goes all the way to the other side of the economy, we cover the entire marketplace. Everybody gets to participate. Now, some people are concerned that if you raise the cost of energy and you raise the cost of everything else that's going to experience a pass-through cost from a carbon tax, that you're going to put a lot of pressure on ordinary people. So to find out whether or not the dividend would actually cover those costs for most people, we had an organization called REMI. Sorry, I'm being told to move. We had an organization called REMI, Regional Economic Models Inc. Take a look at a very similar plan. Starts at $10 per ton, goes up $10 per year, and covers CO2 emissions. So what REMI found was that when you put this kind of policy in place, the result for ordinary people is going to be you have increased real disposable personal income. Income per household actually goes up higher than all the pass-through costs that come at through the economy. It gets cheaper for businesses to hire people. More hiring happens locally. You get a boost to the Main Street economy. Local economies start to actually accelerate, not slow down. So businesses now have an incentive to compete for those dividend dollars by getting more carbon efficient. The net result is 2.8 million new jobs over and above all other job creation in 20 years. And those are not just green jobs. Those are all kinds of jobs in the Main Street economy. Local jobs that can't be outsourced, etc. So you have a recycling effect of the dividend creating not just new income, but more new income on top of it as hiring expands. Now, the problem that we face as a society, and I've heard everybody talking about this the last couple of days, is how are we ever going to get that done? What's the strategy for getting that done? Well, our organization, Citizens Climate Lobby, is that strategy. We work with volunteers, train them to work in local teams to lobby their representatives in Congress. So these volunteers, there are more than 7,500 of them now across the country. They are building real working relationships with their own elected officials and with the staff that help those elected officials write and pass the laws. And so by having respectful relationships with these individuals who have to represent them, they can actually have constructive policy conversations where they learn what are the concerns, the real concerns that cause the political friction and make it hard for people with differing views to talk to each other, and they can try to facilitate more dialogue and build a smarter conversation, right? So those 7,500 volunteers, they're not just talking to Congress, but in talking to Congress, they've had over 1,500 meetings in the last 2 years alone. On top of that, they're talking to the press. Over 3,000 letters to the editor published in 2 years, 475 op-eds, 700-word opinion articles. You combine all of those printed publications, and our media director did an analysis. Your average paper of the ones that we're publishing in has about 80,000 in circulation. The average printed paper gets about 3 people looking at it. Some get nobody, some get 10 people. Of all those people that are looking at every paper, about 40% read the opinion pages. You add all that up, do the math. Does anyone have an idea how many people actually saw that writing in the last 2 years? 338 million actual views, human eyes looking at actual printed pages. And so even if you assume, let's say that you get repeat readers 7 times, you have almost 50 million discrete individuals reading the work of our volunteers, educating people about how to get this done. So the whole thing is about engagement. You're engaging with government, you're engaging with the public, you're engaging with the press, and you're actually creating a policy, the carbon fee and dividend plan, that puts everybody in the entire marketplace in the solution. Everybody has leverage, everyone has money to spend, and everyone can capture that value by competing for those dividend dollars, right? So I know I have to wrap up. The last thing is, very simply, it's really easy to join this effort. You go to citizensclimatelobby.org and become a volunteer. You can join an existing group, start a new group, and be communicating directly with the people that are going to decide whether we get this done or not.
Thank you very much, Joseph. So the next and the last proposal in the session is going to be presented by Job Timiniao. Is it Timiniao? Democratic Finance, Energy of the People, by the People, for the People. And I want to draw your attention to the fact that this proposal has been the winner of the judges' unpopular choice this year.
Thank you very much, Katja. So, what's democratic finance? In a nutshell, it's crowdfunding solar energy on federal rooftops while providing a crowd investor a rate of return on his investment. That is basically our concept. So, why our concept? 2 major opportunities are being wasted right now. On the one hand, the US federal government owns 350,000 buildings with unused roof space. This roof space is equal to about an installation of 8 gigawatts of solar energy. If you translate this in terms of emission reductions, this will be about equal to eliminating 8 coal-fired power plants from the grid. On the other hand, you have a rapidly growing multi-billion-dollar crowdfunding industry that is not being specifically used to target public problems. So our proposal is to put those 2 together, use crowdfunding to target the public problem of green energy development and climate change mitigation by opening up the federal roof space and allowing investors like you and me to invest in that roof space and implement solar energy. So of course the key question is, can this even work? Is this even possible? So the practicality of our innovation is based on 4 dimensions. First, the Delaware National Guard has agreed to open up its roof space in Delaware for investment through this model. So that's in itself already a pilot project that kind of addresses that some of the barriers at the very least can be eliminated. Second, engagement with policy experts. We are in the process of submitting policy documents to experts and to policymakers on the Hill, sponsored by Third Way and the Foundation for Renewable Energy and Environment. Third, investor interest. Early experimentation by organizations such as Mosaic, $1 trillion fund, but also Indiegogo and Kickstarter, has proved not only practical feasibility, but also significant growth potential and investor interest. Finally, fourth, there was a moment of financial judgment. We have been in a conversation with Goldman Sachs financial experts who have tested our financial structure. So that brings me to the question, how would we make this work? So like I said, we open up a platform that is accessible to the average investor with a minimum payment, minimum investment of about $25. And you get a rate of return on that investment over time. The projects, meanwhile, can be supplied by federal agencies, such as the Federal Energy Management Program, or the General Services Authority, with the authority to actually manage the buildings of the federal government and identify which buildings would be suitable for deployment. So the platform aggregates these projects into a bundle of portfolios. So you could, for instance, imagine a portfolio of California projects, or Delaware projects, or Massachusetts projects that are then opened up to investment to the general investor, to the general public. Finally, a program administrator manages the day-to-day operations of the platform, manages dividend repayment to the investors, and other strategic operations. So we feel that this proposal has high political acceptability, primarily because its nature is from the bottom up. It's kind of creating a groundswell from what people want to see, what people want to do, especially in this case in terms of green energy development. So in that case, it kind of stands apart from more top-down command and control initiatives or proposals. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's basically my presentation. I will leave you with this. So imagine being personally able to invest in the energy future of your country, right? Imagine being able to vote with your dollars for a greener, more sustainable federal government, and at the same time, charting a new course for energy development, and then finally, receiving a money payback to do so. That is, in a nutshell, the promise of our proposal.
Thank you very much, Josh. Right now, we're going to give 1 minute to Kurt and Josh to share what they're going to be speaking about with each of the groups. And after that, we will break down into 2 groups here and 1 group over here. Would anyone of you want to start?
Thanks. I already had my chance. Thanks. As we read through these proposals and the proposals of others that were competing with the judges and the people's the voting choice of word, I mean, there were really some fantastic proposals in general. We were just excited to see so much thought go into how there could be other creative, disruptive national solutions on climate. You know, the 3 very quickly pieced things that I'd like to discuss. With the first proposal on a carbon fee to help offset fiscal or help influence fiscal discipline, I think there's still a real question about how would you market that, particularly to the energy-intensive states, the Louisianas, the West Virginias, the Wyomings. There's obviously a lot of difficulty there, and they have outsized influence in the Senate. A similar question regarding the carbon fee and dividend. The platform of influence in Congress is interesting and very critical. The challenge, of course, is that for every touch your groups make to members of Congress, there is, at the very least, an equal and opposite touch coming from those with a investment in the status quo. So it'd be interesting to have a conversation about that and the challenges that you face there. And then with the Democratic fundraising, the Kickstarter model, I think there are just some questions around implementation, particularly startup costs for the federal government and management oversight of creating a new and interesting technology platform for a government that has tried that recently with mixed success. So other than those very small challenges, we can move forward on all of them.
Should go first. Because indeed, those are very similar questions, because especially talking about the first proposal, it's not whether something economically makes sense, it's who wins and who loses. And I'm observing the process and actually thinking similar thoughts as that proposal puts forth. Political compromise is often driven by buying out those interests. When you see, for example, at the state level, a community that takes a landfill generally gets paid for that disruption to their community, the burden to that community. Think of it reverse. I'm very curious whether that proposal could actually look at how we're going to invest in places that will seriously get hurt by the disruption we're talking about. And we shouldn't, I've learned in my business, you have to acknowledge those issues. You can't pretend they don't exist, and it happens. I used to be an advocate in running an advocacy organization. First step was always taking seriously the opposition's concerns and figuring out how to deal with them in a way that works. So I'm very consistent point. As a federal employee who's worked with GSA, I could ask a lot of questions. But one is, in effect, GSA operates in a very politically narrow band. So as much as you think it, and it does make sense, let's take all their square footage and do something good with it. Solar panels are just one idea. And indeed, under Martha Johnson, they were headed down this road. They were going to lead the country on the executive order on sustainability. They got blown right out of that space very quickly. They're very conservative politically. They're always worried about the next group that may not take kindly to the group that's currently in power. So I need to get you to recognize how federal bureaucracies behave, especially bureaucracies like GSA, who are generally behind the curtain, who own all the space you're talking about. I have a similar concern on the other. It's part of my conversation, but just to point out, in a conversation with a political person concerning the election in Providence, mayoral election, some $60,000 worth of ad buys came in the last 24 hours of that election from sources nobody could find. They were political givebacks or trade-offs, calls made by lobbyists who are moving political money around in ways that are really sophisticated. And do we really understand what drives the behavior of politicians? And I would suggest, well, the engagement is set at a random organization that believes just like you. Gee, if you bring the information and facts to somebody, they'll respond. Their behavior is not driven by good information and good facts. Their behavior is much more complex than that. They are driven by good, they have goodwill, they will listen, but when it gets to the nuts and bolts of things, something has to change that system, because I'm not sure your approach to the system really will change their behavior. But we'll see. I mean, that's something people in advocacy and engagement have thought about for years. So, but just be aware, the environmental community threw around $85 million in this midterm because they finally come to the realization that if they don't get in the game, they're not gonna be influential. And that's a sad statement, but it is what it is.
Thank you very much, our experts. So right now, we will need to do a small rearrangement in terms of chairs. I suggest that the proposal of the little engine that could get